So first thing I want to do is go over some popular conspiracy theories about how the world works. And there are different variations. So I'll just go over a very simplified, clear version. So we start with the Knights Templars. Knights Templars is probably the most successful secret society in the world. It was founded in the year 1118 as part of the Crusades. So there were Christian pilgrims who went to Jerusalem. Along the way, they would get robbed. So Knights Templars was a volunteer organization designated by the Vatican to protect these pilgrims. And over time, what happened was that the Knights Templars became a bank as well, where you could deposit your gold with the Knights Templars, and they would give you a receipt, and when you went to Jerusalem, they would give you the gold back, okay? So they became a bank, and over time, they became an extremely powerful organization because they were a convergence of politics, military, religion, and finance. And that's why in 1314, the Catholic Church and the King of France made them illegal, okay? They burned their leader, Jacques de Molay, at the stake and accused him of blasphemy for worshiping a false god named Baphomet. So the Knights Templars were in Jerusalem, and Jerusalem was convergence of all religions. So they started to become curious about different religions and started to engage in Hermetic philosophy, Neoplatonism, Gnostic philosophy, which were all considered heretical by the Catholic Church, okay? So this was a banned organization. And then what happened was that people speculate that rather than disappear, the Knights Templars re-emerged as the Scottish Rite Freemasons. And why they're important is that they would go on to create the Protestant Revolution, the Protestant Reformation, as well as the Silent Revolution. They conspired to create the American Revolution, as well as the French Revolution. Basically, they create modernity itself. They came to control England and create the Bank of England, which created the modern financial system of today. Then they went on to create World War I, which led to World War II, and now they're conspiring to create World War III, which would then usher in a new world government, okay? A one world government based in Jerusalem, and it will be controlled by an AI surveillance state. And that's why we're seeing data centers being built all around the world, okay? People also speculate that the Knights Templars were able to continue because they had access to secrets, basically how to communicate with demons, okay? Interdimensional demons. Or Lucifer. And to communicate with demons, you have to make contracts with them through ritual sacrifice. And then what they do is they can take possession of you and offer you secrets. For example, how to live forever, or how to be young forever, or how to build great technology. Okay? They can also tell you how to build nuclear weapons. And so people speculate that the entire point of the one world government and the AI surveillance state is to bring into our world these interdimensional beings so that the elite can live forever, so they can combine with the elite. There are also people who speculate that the Knights Templars go all the way back to Rome and the 13 families, which then became part of Venice. Okay? So there are many different permutations to this conspiracy theory about how the world works. Now, there are lots and lots of issues with this conspiracy theory about how the world works, okay? First of all, there's actually no evidence that any of this is true. We don't know if demons actually exist. There's actually no evidence that demons exist. There's no evidence that this is a giant conspiracy that stretched back 1,000 years, okay? Second thing is, the elite don't know that this is true, okay? The people believe this is true, but if you actually go talk to people who have real power, they think this is complete and utter nonsense, okay? And the third thing about this is that it's anti-historical, meaning that it is a very simplified version of how things work. It doesn't take into account other factors as well. Also, what we learn in this class is game theory. And this is also anti-game theory. Because one thing that you learn in this class is that when people are in power, they become arrogant, hubris. They become stupid. So it's very common for powerful people to rise and then have a spectacular fall, okay? That's just the iron law of history. So for these reasons, we know this theory is not true. At the same time, there are certain things about this theory that are very compelling, okay? So let's go over some of them. Well, the first thing about this theory that's compelling is that it is very intuitive. What intuitive just means is that if I tell it to someone, it makes sense to that person. It makes a lot more sense than the history that we're taught in school. That's kind of strange, right? None of this is correct, but it's intuitive. Second of all, is that it's explanatory. In that even though this is not factual, it does help us understand how the world works. It's a very clear explanation. Now, the third thing that is the most paradoxical is that it is predictive. Meaning, it helps us predict how things will turn out in the future. And so even though the elite think this is all insane and there's no way they're plotting to create World War III, there's absolutely no way that they're trying to create an AI surveillance state and create a one world government, chances are these things will happen, okay? So this creates a huge paradox. How is it that this is not factual, okay? This is not at all factual, but it is truthful. Meaning it gives us tremendous insight into how the world works. All right? So this is a paradox. This is all nonsense, but it helps us predict the future. So it's truthful. So what I'm going to do now is try to explain to you how the system really works, okay? So the main thing you need to understand is that this is metaphorical. Metaphorical. It is not literal. Okay? So what I'm going to try to do now is try to factually explain to you how the world works, okay? And what you will see is that this is a metaphorical explanation for how the world works. It's a good story that people can understand and help them appreciate the nuance of this world. But now I want to tell you how it works literally. Okay? All right. So the first thing I'm going to explain to you is that there are people in this world, they're mystics, they're occultists. And they spend all their time trying to figure out how the universe works, okay? They're trying to uncover the secrets of the universe. And there are different secrets, right? There's astrology, okay? The movement of stars can determine people's fate, okay? The idea of astrology. Then you have alchemy, how to turn nothing into gold, how to turn lead into gold. Then you have eschatology. Eschatology is how the world will end. What's the point of the universe? When will God come to the earth, okay? And you have sacred geometry. Think of sacred geometry as like particle physics, which is the underlying essence of the universe, okay? So occultists, and these could be poets, philosophers, mystics, they spend all their time thinking about what is the fundamental truth of the universe. And then there are people, okay, who seek power, wealth, and fame. All right? And what they recognize is that if they really want to seek power, wealth, and fame, they need to know these secrets as well. So what happens is that they form secret societies in order to access these secrets of astrology, alchemy, eschatology, and sacred geometry, and then implement in the world in order to create power, wealth, and influence for themselves. The thing to understand is that there are many different occultists, many different secret societies, and this all creates very different combinations. Okay, but they're all trying to do the same thing, which is trying to achieve an eschatology. All right? The third element is that you need certain individuals in order to propel society forward, in order to achieve the eschatology of the secret societies, okay? And these people are like agents that the secret societies sponsor. And historically, these people included Julius Caesar, Napoleon, Hitler, Stalin. Today we have Trump and Putin. So these are agents or maybe messianic figures or even scapegoats that secret societies promote in order to push forward a particular agenda. And remember that it looks simple, but it's not, because there are different occultists with different ideas, and then there are different secret societies who are competing against each other, and they're promoting different individuals in order to achieve their particular vision. All right? What drives these individuals like Julius Caesar, Napoleon, Hitler, Stalin, Trump, and Putin is that they themselves believe that they're the real sons of God. Okay? They're the true Messiah who's going to lead the world forward. And the secret societies, these occultists, are just useful idiots. Okay? So this is one framework for understanding the movement of history. All right. So now I'm going to go much more specific. Okay? All right. So there's another way to frame this, which is to say that in the world, in society, there are different groupings, okay? So think of politics. Think of finance, science, religion, military. Okay? Now, the thing about each of these different fields or disciplines is that you have a diversity, a range of behavior with different belief systems. Okay? So each of these different disciplines have their own diverse fields of belief. At a particular point, there's a convergence amongst these different fields. Okay? What makes them converge is the fact that in each field, you have certain individuals, an extreme minority, who seek power, order, and control. Okay? So again, in each field, you're going to have a range. And on one extreme version are those who hate power, but on the other extreme version are those who love power. Okay? And people who love power, order, and control of all these different fields are going to come together, and they're going to work together in order to achieve power, order, and control. And we call these people secret societies. Okay? Because they're bounded by a similar interest. Now, what's really interesting is that over time, as society becomes much more larger, these different fields expand in size. creating greater diversity. And what happens is that this convergence becomes much stronger in society. And the reason why is that these different fields are not able to coordinate together, but the people inside this convergence are able to coordinate together, which is a huge advantage in society. Okay? Which means that they're able to achieve power, order, and control much more likely. Okay? So what's interesting is that as society declines, because it's become much more bureaucratic, much too large, much too corrupt. These societies, in fact, become much more powerful over time because they're able to stay much more cohesive. Okay? Now, once these secret societies are formed, what you'll discover is that there are a huge number of these different secret societies. Okay? And different individuals can join different secret societies. And these secret societies can come from the fact that they went to a certain school, or they grew up in a certain religion, or their families. Okay? There are different combinations. And these secret societies are in competition with each other. And so the criteria for the competition are three things. Okay? Legitimacy, authority, and unity, cohesion. Okay? Why are you more legitimate than other secret societies? Why do you have more authority, expertise than other secret societies? Why are you much more unified than other secret societies? Okay? To solve this problem, what the secret societies will do is they will go back in time and reimagine history to show that they are connected with the entirety of history. Okay? So what they'll say is, okay, well, we got to start not today in our school, but because we're connected to the Freemasons, or they're connected to the Knights Templars, okay? So they go back and create a cosmology that explains their origins. And obviously, the further you go back in time, the more legitimate, the more authoritative you are. Does that make sense? All right, so they're going to go back and they're going to create their own history. And that's why people think that they stretch all the way back to Rome. Okay, or maybe Babylon. And what allows for people to believe that this is continuous is the fact that the elites in each particular time behave the same way, which is about all seeking power, order, and control. And those who win out have three particular characteristics, okay? First of all, these are people who are addicted to power. They obsess about it. They're obsessive about it. They will do everything possible in order to obtain more power. And power is expansive and all-consuming, okay? Meaning they cannot stop but try to obtain more power. They behave in a certain way that looks as though they are possessed by demons. Okay? And in fact, they do worship demons. And the reason why is they think they worship all gods in a search for reason. Okay? They are looking for the greatest secrets of the universe, so they are open-minded. They are looking for all possibilities. They'll worship Lucifer, but they'll also worship Baphomet. They'll worship Osiris. They'll worship Isis. Okay? So now we understand how the world works literally. Throughout history, the elites have behaved the same way. Okay? And even though these elites are fighting with each other, they are moving forward an agenda that consolidates power onto the hands of a few people, which gives the impression that this is all a continuous agenda controlled by a few people. Okay? Does it all make sense, guys? All right? So remember, this is the metaphorical understanding of how the world works, a world controlled by a particular secret society, the Knights Templars, who became the Freemasons, who then became the Illuminati, who control the world today, and they're trying to usher in a one world government, an surveillance state, and summon demons into this world in order to live forever, okay? So this is a grand conspiracy. But again, it doesn't explain why we have no evidence, why the elite don't think they're part of this, and why this is anti-historical, okay? But once we transform this into a literal explanation, and this is a literal explanation, this explains everything, okay? The elite don't think this is conspiracy because they're too busy fighting each other. They're not good at the grand scheme of things. Whereas the people who are not involved in this game can look at the movement history and can come to an intuitive understanding of how this thing moves. And it's moving towards more control, more order, and more power. Okay? And this helps us explain why the system persists even though the elites will rise and they will fall. Because these elites are already in competition with each other. So what's happening is that certain elites are replacing other elites, but they all have the same agenda, which is more power, more order, more control. Okay, does it make sense, guys? Okay, and that's why we actually read the texts of these secret societies, of these thinkers. They look as though they are building on top of each other, even though they probably have not read each other, okay? People who seek power are very much alike. They're different from you and me in that they are probably psychopaths, okay? All they care about is power, and so powerful people come together in order to create more power for themselves. Okay, does it make sense, guys? Okay, so now what we're gonna do is we're gonna go over the evidence, okay? So what I wanna first do is discuss this man. His name is Albert Pike. And he was born in the year 1809, 1891. And why he's important is that he's considered the grand architect of American Freemasonry. Why American Freemasonry is important is that it's the people who control the American government. 1/3 of all American presidents were Freemasons, okay? And these people today control the American military, the national security apparatus, the CIA, the FBI, all right? They don't call the Freemasons, but they go back to the Freemasons. So they share the similar ideas of the Freemasons. So Albert Pike was one of the major leaders of the American Freemasons, and he's considered the great architect, meaning that he built the system and the ideas that underpin modern-day American Freemasonry today. His most important work is called Morals and Dogma. And it's basically the standard textbook of American Freemasonry, okay? So we're going to look at a few passages from Morals and Dogma. And I know they're a bit long, but it's very important for us to understand how they think, okay? So I'm going to read the first part, and then Alan, if you could help me read this part, okay? So I'll read the first part. The rough ashlar, okay, this is the ashlar, guys, which is a stone, is a people as a mass, rude and unorganized. So society is diverse, it's chaotic, and we the Freemasons, our objective in life is to create order out of chaos. The perfect ashlar, okay, or typical stone, symbol of perfection, is the state. The purpose of government is to create order out of chaos, to perfect humanity. The rulers deriving their powers from the consent of the governed, the Constitution and law speaking the will of the people. The government, harmonious, symmetrical, efficient, its powers properly distributed and duly adjusted in equilibrium. Okay, so think of society as a forest. No, a forest is chaotic. There are diseases in a forest. It could burn down. What we really want to do is create a temple of stone that is perfect, that is eternal, that is divine. Okay? We want to burn down the forest and build a temple with our bare hands. I know God was the one who created the forest, but God willed us to perfect his work. If we delineate a cube on a plane surface, okay, we have visible 3 faces and 9 external lines drawn between 7 points. The complete cube has 3 more faces, making 6, 3 more lines, making 12, and 1 more point, making 8. as the number 12 includes the sacred numbers 3, 5, 7, and 3 times 3, or 9, is produced by adding the sacred number 3 to 9, while its own two figures, 1 to the unit of monad and duad, added together make the same sacred number 3. It was called the perfect number, and the cube became a symbol of perfection, okay? So this is God. What we're trying to do is we're trying to create God on earth. And how do we know it's God? Because it is perfection itself. How do we know it's perfection? Because of mathematics, geometry, okay? Geometry is a language of God. Once you understand geometry, you understand how God thinks. So the cube is perfect, so we want to turn society into a cube. In fact, we're going to turn everyone into a cube. And how do we do so? Artificial intelligence, guys, okay? Artificial intelligence. Okay. All right. So again, the idea is we want to read them in order to understand the essence of their thinking. Okay. So Freemasonry is the ultimate religion. Why? Because it encompasses all previous religions, including Egyptian Hermetism, okay? Including the Greek mystery cults of Pythagoras, including the Kabbalah. Okay, so it has scoured the entire history and found the best ideas of humanity and put them together to create Freemasonry. And the ultimate goal is for each of us to become a stone, stoic, unrelenting, perfect faith. And then if we put all of humanity together and we're all stones, then we can create the perfect temple of God. Okay, we can create God on earth. So imagine a pyramid. We're all stone in the pyramid. And we all have responsibility to become that stone through faith, through practice, through reflection, okay? So Socrates should enter into Adam and produce Marcus Aurelius. So the height of humanity is reflection and reason, where we surrender our emotions to geometry. So what Albert Pike is doing is trying to explain the eschatology of Freemasonry, okay? The eschatology is this. We want to create an empire of reason, okay? What he calls a holy empire of reason. And for that, we must create revolutions around the world, okay? And what he's doing is he's trying to say that this is a crusade, and we go back to the time of the Knights Templars. And we were the ones who brought about the French Revolution and created Napoleon in order to achieve this holy reason of empire, okay? So what he's doing is he's going back into history and rewriting history to show that the Freemasons were the end point of history, the natural evolution of the Knights Templars. Also, what he's trying to tell people is that we do things in secret because before we were the Knights Templars, the French and the Catholic Church hunted us down. So we had to disguise ourselves under stone masonry, okay? So that's why we took the guise of the Freemasons, because the Freemasons were just a workers' guild who built temples. And we took their shape in order to protect ourselves and then to try to promote our mission in secret, okay? All right? So this is why people believe that the Freemasons come from Knights Templars. What this is really doing is it's trying to bring legitimacy and authority to the Freemasons by reimagining history as a movement towards Freemasonry. It doesn't make sense, guys, okay? So he talks about how the Freemasons not only created the French Revolution, but they brought about Napoleon in order to try to create a one world government, okay? And that failed, but if Napoleon failed, don't worry, America will succeed. This is another passage we will not read, but he talks about how the Freemasons actually created conditions for the French Revolution and conspired for generations, for decades, in order to avenge the death of their lost leader, Jacques de Molay, in 1314. Okay? So the Freemasons think centuries ahead, and they plan decades in advance. And again, this is all to create legitimacy and authority for their movement. This is a rewriting of history. None of this is true. The idea here is that the Freemasons and Knights Templars were so successful because they were a secret society, but first and foremost, they were a company. They were a hierarchy. okay? So they were like a triangle. And to climb the hierarchy, you have to constantly reinvent yourself. You have to adopt new ideas. And based on your performance, based on your ideology, they will promote you to a new rank, okay? So in Scottish Rite Freemasonry, there are 33 ranks. And you just climb up higher and higher. And each time you climb the rank, they will teach you a new way of understanding the world. And based on your fluidity, based on your mental flexibility, you'll climb higher and higher, okay? So they're trying to train you into a mastery of knowledge. So this passage just shows you that the Freemasons are trying to incorporate all philosophies, including the Kabbalah, the Gnosticism, and Hermetic philosophy, okay? And as a result, they try to be complete, okay? So the main advantage is in their completeness, meaning they have an explanation for everything. So what they're trying to tell us is that we are first and foremost souls that came from heaven. And why do we come to heaven? To experience the world. And we become trapped in our bodies because our bodies want to experience sensual pleasures, but our souls want to only experience spiritual pleasures. So the world is a spiritual war in ourselves, between our material selves, which want sex, food, and money, and our spiritual selves that seek connection with reason, okay? And the way to defeat ourselves is through geometry, by turning ourselves into a sacred cube that connects back to the divine. So this is the idea of fraternity. And how do you create a fraternity? Well, the simple way is to engage in a supper together, okay? Just like Jesus in the Last Supper, and to share communion, okay? Is that a communion? So that you all feel connected with each other. But over time, because there are certain elements of the Freemasons, Knights Templars, who want power, order, and control, they engage in more extreme practices. And so what they will do literally is they will eat the dead corpse of an old Freemason in order to connect themselves to each other as well as to their past. Okay? They believe that the Freemasons, through tremendous spiritual sacrifice, are able to congregate, inhabit spiritual energy that still resides in the body. So they will dig up the corpse and then eat that corpse in a commune, in a dinner, okay? All right? So again, the thing about secret societies is that those who are the most extreme, those who are most fanatical, will win out in the end. So let me explain to you the symbolism of Freemasonry. This is a compass. Okay, what does the compass do? The compass sets the boundaries. It rules, right? This is a square, okay? The square limits, okay? So the idea is that when you first join Freemasonry, you have to focus on the square, which is your own spiritual alchemy, okay? To discipline yourself, to focus yourself, to learn how to be ruled, okay, by the compass. Then you reach a point where you must rule yourself. So you must teach others how to be disciplined, how to be focused. And then you reach a point when you combine the square and the compass, which is you lead the Freemasons to control the whole world, to create the holy empire of reason. All right? So according to different ranks, you see the symbol in a different way. All right, the G, what does the G stand for? Well, there are three different interpretations, okay? It stands for geometry, of course, because of the square and the compass. It stands for God, or Gnosticism, or Grand Architect, okay? So what the Freemasons believe is that there is a God, but he created this world for us to perfect by ourselves, then God left us. So he's the architect, but that means that we have a responsibility to renovate and perfect the world that we live in, okay? But there's also, people believe that the G stands for the generative principle, okay? So there's male and there's female. The female is the productive principle, the thing that gives birth. The male is a generative principle, the thing that energizes the female, okay? So what's interesting is that if you put all this together, you put generative principle, generate plus geometry, what you get is God. Okay? And what does generative and geometry equal? It equals AI, artificial intelligence. So at the very beginning of Freemasonry, there was an impetus, a desire among them to prove that they could be God by creating life itself. All right? In the beginning, they called this golems. But now, if you think about it, that's why they want to create AI. To prove that they can be God themselves. Once you create AI, then you perfect the world. Okay? So that is Freemasonry. And you can see how it gives rise now to artificial intelligence. I'm not saying that they plan for artificial intelligence. What I'm saying is that the people in charge now are artificial intelligence, including people like Sam Altman, Peter Thiel, Larry Ellison, Elon Musk. They can now go back to this tradition and basically appropriate this tradition in order to justify their AI surveillance state. All right? Okay, so now let's move on. This is Zbigniew Brzezinski. And he was National Security Advisor to Jimmy Carter, okay? Who was President of the United States. And he's a founder of something called the Trilateral Commission, which basically tries to implement American grand strategy in the world. And this was funded by David Rockefeller, who obviously was one of the wealthiest, most powerful Americans to ever live. So this is a very powerful individual. And we're going to read certain writings from his book, Between Two Ages. And when we read it, you'll see how similar it is to Albert Pike. Now, I don't think that Zbigniew Brzezinski read Albert Pike. And he himself is probably not a Freemason. But again, you don't have to read Albert Pike. You don't have to be a Freemason to think like them. These are all people obsessed with power, control, and order. And they're going to look for elements of different religions in order to justify their pursuit of power, order, and control, okay? So this is from the book Between Two Ages. So this book is written about 1970s, okay? This is like 40, 50 years ago. What's amazing about this paragraph is that it perfectly describes America today. This is not just a prophecy, it's almost like a plan, okay? So let me explain what he's saying. He's saying that democracy is problematic. Why? Because it always leads to polarization. You're always going to have different factions within this democracy who are going to fight each other. Eventually, you're going to reach a point where they actually refuse to get along. That's what's happening in America today between the left and the right, between the Democrats and the Republicans, okay? And he's saying this is going to create a series of crises, social crisis. And the solution, he believes, is a technocracy, all right? So basically, a bureaucracy in Washington, D.C., run by engineers who use artificial intelligence, who use data and statistics in order to better govern society, and who are better able to use this social polarization in order to better manage society, okay? And this is a really, really interesting sentence. Persisting social crises, okay? So what's happening in America right now is a divide between the left and right. The emergence of a charismatic personality. Who's that person? Charismatic personality? Donald Trump, guys. And the exploitation of mass media, okay? So just basically social media in order to indoctrinate and brainwash you. To obtain public confidence would be the stepping stones in the piecemeal transformation of the United States into a highly controlled society, a AI surveillance state. So what he's saying is this. Eventually you reach a point where the divide will be so vast, the economy will be in such trouble, the people will be so angry that they will demand a Napoleon or Julius Caesar to arise to lead them into a dictatorship. And this could be a good thing because this could create a technocracy which would be better able to govern society, okay? All right? So this is a continuation of the Freemason project of trying to create order out of chaos. All right? And what he's saying is this: it will be the conservatives, the Republicans, who will win out in the Civil War because they're the ones who are preoccupied with public order and gadgetry, okay? They are the ones who will want the AI surveillance state. Okay? Once you have the AI surveillance state, you now have the technocracy. And the world will be perfect. All right? Does it make sense to you guys, what he's saying here? This is an amazing paragraph written 40, 50 years ago. So I'm not saying he's a Freemason. I'm not saying he's part of secret society, but he sure thinks like a Freemason. So what he's saying here is that democracy was a historical accident. It was good for America before, but in the future, liberalism will probably be a bad thing, okay? Because it's too divisive, okay? So what's the solution then? So this is an amazing passage, okay? This is the guy who was National Security Advisor to Jimmy Carter. At this time, this is the height of the Cold War. America is fighting a war with the Soviet Union. And the National Security Advisor of the United States to Jimmy Carter says that democracy is bad, Marxism is good. Okay? Marxism is good. Why? Because it is the endpoint of history. The French Revolution was about promoting reason over emotion. Marxism is a natural progression of the French Revolution. Marxism is what promises a victory of reason over emotion. Okay? So what is the AI surveillance state? Ultimately, it is techno-Marxism. Okay? That's what they want. They want communism. National Security Advisor to Jimmy Carter, one of the most powerful Americans in the world, want Marxism. Why? Because Marxism, communism, is the implementation of the ideas of Freemasonry in our world. So this is Larry Ellison. And Larry Ellison probably doesn't read books. Okay, he's probably never read Albert Pike. He's probably never read Zbigniew Brzezinski. Okay? But he's one of the most powerful men in America because he founded a company called Oracle. Oracle. Right? And this is him with Donald Trump announcing something called Operation Stargate. So they're going to build data centers all around the United States in order to create their AI surveillance state. Now, Larry Ellison is one of the most powerful men in the world, but his background is very, very interesting. He founded a company, Oracle. At the time, it was called RSI. This is from a biography of Larry Ellison called The Difference Between God and Larry Ellison, okay? And it talks about how in the first 5 years, his company was terrible. They were a database company designed to collect data and then organize this data in a way that was useful to companies and to governments, okay? But they were so bad, if you put data into this computer, they lost all the data. They were just incompetent. But who are their clients? It's the CIA and the Navy, who had unlimited money. Okay? So the company is incompetent, destroys data, but the government kept on supporting them. This is really confusing, okay? The CIA, the Navy, you're gonna hire a company because the company's gonna do it cheaper and faster and more effectively than you can do it, right? But what happened with Oracle is that it cost them a lot of money, they weren't getting what they wanted, and they had to put their own resources to create Oracle. They had to help Oracle come into being. So Oracle and Larry Ellison are both creations of the CIA and the Navy. Why do they do that? Okay? That's a very curious question. I don't know the answer to this. It might be because Larry Ellison is just a really charismatic guy. It may be because he has relatives who work for the CIA. It may be because he got really lucky. Who knows? But this is a very curious fact about how these companies like Oracle started. All right? We're also going to talk about this guy, Peter Thiel. Peter Thiel is probably one of the most powerful men in America right now. I think he's actually much more powerful than Elon Musk. Why? Because in 2016, he recognized the potential in Donald Trump, and he supported Donald Trump's campaign. He also saw the potential in J.D. Vance, and he supported J.D. Vance's venture capital career, as well as his Senate race, and then he promoted J.D. Vance as the VP for Donald Trump, okay? And when you read Peter Thiel, even though he's an entrepreneur, he actually reads like a Freemason. It's really, really strange. Okay, so this is from his book, From 0 to 1, okay? And he's talking about how to build a great company. What he tells you is this: if you want to build a great company to compete against other companies, you're an idiot. Competition is for losers. Capitalism is for losers. What you want is monopoly. What you want is communism. What you want is to dominate, okay? And that means you need a secret in order to monetize. How do you build a great company? You create a secret society, all right? And what's a secret society? You access the occult, okay? If you really want to make a lot of money, guys, don't spend your time programming and looking for the best technology. Don't do that, that's a waste of time. Look at the occult. Figure out the secrets of humanity. Figure out the secrets of the occult and build your company around that idea, and you will come to dominate, all right? So he's very clear about this, okay? What he's saying is that if you want to start a company, start a religion first, man. He's saying it literally now. Start a religion or start a mafia, it doesn't matter, okay? Now, Peter Thiel is important because he is a mentor to two individuals, Mark Zuckerberg as well as Sam Altman. Remember from last week, we read Karen Howell's book, Empire of AI, where Sam Altman says that the most successful founders do not set out to create companies. They are on a mission to create something closer to a religion, all right? So he's basically using the words of his mentor, Peter Thiel. This is also what Sam Altman said. People talk about how much energy it takes to train an AI model, but it also takes a lot of energy to train a human. It takes like 20 years of life and all the food you eat during that time before you get smart, okay? So these people literally see no difference between an AI and a human. You're just energy to be exploited, okay? You're just an energy that I need to churn into a cube in order to create my holy temple of reason, right? And this is another friend of Peter Thiel's called Alexander Karp, and together they founded a company called Palantir. What is Palantir? Palantir is the ultimate AI surveillance company, okay? So Oracle creates databases of information. Everything about you is in an Oracle database. Palantir then takes this information and predicts how you'll behave, okay? And this is the Palantir manifesto called the Technological Republic. They're not Freemasons, but they might as well be Freemasons, okay? So this is the manifesto, and it basically says that we need to create a technocracy. That's all it's saying. We're going to create a technocracy, an anti-gun state, and that's a good thing, all right? All right, and I will leave you with this. Peter Thiel, for the past few years, has been giving speeches around the world talking about the Antichrist. Okay, what's the Antichrist? How much does an Antichrist rise to power? By playing on our fears of technology and seducing us into decadence with the Antichrist's slogan, peace and safety. The Antichrist is anyone and everyone who opposes the AI surveillance state. Okay? So you might think, no, wait, isn't it more logically to believe that the AI surveillance state is the Antichrist? No! Peter Thiel said, no, it's the opposite, guys. It's you oppose the anti-surveillance state, and then you're the Antichrist. And the Antichrist is evil. Therefore, we have to destroy these people. Okay? Whoever prevents us from building the anti-surveillance state is pure evil. And once you understand this, then we will achieve our holy empire of reason. Okay? Any questions, guys?
So can we understand the Freemasonry, which is the kingdom of reason, as a kind of brainwash?
Okay. Freemasonry is a group of people who practice certain things. And at the very heart of Freemasonry is an eschatological vision of trying to achieve the end of the world, which is a one world government based in Jerusalem, and where everyone obeys this government. And if you obey, then the world is perfect. And so how do you get people to obey? AI, right? You don't want to work out, you don't want to study, you don't want to work and pay taxes? Well, let's have an AI in your head, a microchip in your head that tells you, no, Vincent, you should pay your taxes. No, Vincent, you shouldn't drive drunk. Okay? And that's the idea. It's about alchemy, human perfection, trying to turn you into an obedient robot that can be programmed. Okay? Does that make sense? But it's a good thing, because once we do that, there'll be peace, there'll be happiness, there'll be safety. It's a good thing. Human subjectivity is bad because it leads to sin, it leads to errors, it leads to confusion. If we all think alike, the world is not perfect. We now achieve a common brotherhood of humanity. We now achieve God. Everyone thinks alike. And that's what AI can do for us.
Professor Jiang's latest lecture begins in a strange place: Knights Templar, Freemasons, demons, one world government, and an AI surveillance state. Now, normally, when a lecture opens like that, my first instinct is to check whether I've accidentally clicked on a channel with a flaming pyramid in the thumbnail. But stay with it, because the interesting part of Jiang's argument is not whether secret societies are literally running the world from a candlelit basement, probably with terrible Wi-Fi. The interesting part is what he does next. He says the story is not factual, but it may still be truthful. And that is where this gets serious. If you find this useful, like and subscribe. This is the part where many people will either switch off or lean too far in. Both reactions miss the point. Jiang is not simply saying, here is the secret map of history. He is describing a kind of grand myth, a story people use when official explanations feel too thin, and they often do feel thin. You are told history is about institutions, elections, trade flows, regulations, technological innovation, and the occasional man with a bad haircut deciding to invade somewhere. That is all true. But it does not always explain the mood of the age. It does not explain why power keeps centralizing. It does not explain why every crisis seems to produce more surveillance. It does not explain why every promise of liberation somehow arrives with a login screen, a data policy, and a camera pointed at your face. So conspiracy theories become popular because they give people a clean story, too clean usually, but emotionally satisfying. And Jiang's first move is clever. He says, this version is not literal. Then he asks, why does it still feel predictive? That is the real question. That phrase matters. Not factual, but truthful. I would phrase it slightly differently. The myth may be false in its details, but accurate in its pattern. No, we do not need demons to explain modern power. Frankly, demons would be overqualified for some of the people involved. But we do need to understand incentives. People who seek power tend to behave in recognizable ways. They look for control. They justify it morally. They build institutions around it. They call it order, safety, progress, national security, public health, efficiency, innovation, or whatever word happens to test well that decade. The packaging changes. The impulse does not. That is Jiang's strongest point. History is not controlled by one immortal committee. It is pushed by recurring types of people, recurring institutional incentives, and recurring fantasies of control. In plain terms, the faces change, but the appetite remains. This is where Jiang moves from myth into political sociology. He says that every major field has a range of people inside it. Most are normal. They want careers, status, security, maybe a bigger office, and a chair that doesn't ruin their spine. But at the extreme end, you find people who are obsessed with power. In politics, they want control over law. In finance, control over capital. In science and technology, control over systems. In religion or ideology, control over meaning. In the military and security world, control over force. When people from those extremes find each other, they do not need a 1,000-year-old secret handshake to cooperate. They already share the same operating system. Order first, control second, justification afterwards. This is why conspiracy is often the wrong word. The better word is alignment. Their interests align. A state wants prediction. A tech company wants data. A military agency wants intelligence. A politician wants obedience. A billionaire wants monopoly. Each one can tell himself he is doing something noble, and sometimes, yes, they may even believe it. That is the dangerous part. The truly dangerous people are rarely the ones who wake up saying, "Today I shall become the villain." They wake up saying, "I alone understand what must be done." History has met that type before. It never ends with less paperwork. The Freemasonry section is less important as a claim about who secretly controls America, and more important as a language of power. Order out of chaos, perfect humanity, discipline the passions, replace disorder with geometry. That language sounds antique now. It smells faintly of old books, candle wax, and men taking themselves far too seriously in ceremonial aprons. But the structure is familiar. Modern technocracy speaks the same language in updated vocabulary. It does not say, "We will perfect the soul through sacred geometry." It says, "We will optimize behavior through data." It does not say, "We will build the holy empire of reason." It says, "We will create safer, smarter, more efficient systems." It does not say, "We will subdue human passion." It says, "We will reduce risk." Same impulse, better software. And this is where AI enters the story. AI gives the old dream of rational control a machine powerful enough to make the dream feel practical, not mystical, not symbolic. Practical. You can monitor populations, predict behavior, allocate resources, detect dissent, shape feeds, score risk, automate bureaucracy, remove human judgment, and call it fairness. I'm not saying that every AI lab is secretly reading Albert Pike before lunch. Most of them are probably reading investor memos, which is spiritually worse. But Jiang's point is that the old dream of reason ruling humanity has found a new instrument, and that instrument does not need to wear a robe. It just needs a server farm. This is one of the strongest moments in the lecture. The Brzezinski passage matters because it does not sound like fantasy. It sounds like managerial politics looking at democracy and quietly losing patience. The idea is simple. Democracy produces conflict. Conflict produces crisis. Crisis produces demand for order. And order creates opportunities for technocrats, security agencies, and political entrepreneurs who promise to calm the chaos. Now we should be careful here. Predicting that a society may become more controlled is not the same as planning every step of it. A doctor can predict illness without causing it. Although in politics, one should never give the doctor full control of the pharmacy. Still, the pattern is real. When societies polarize, people become more willing to accept control if it is aimed at the people they dislike. The left accepts censorship if it is called anti-extremism. The right accepts surveillance if it is called law and order. Liberals accept data power if it is called safety. Conservatives accept state power if it is called security. Everyone thinks the machine will only be used against the dangerous people. Then the definition of dangerous changes. That is how controlled societies grow, not always by invasion, but by consent in installments. The Oracle section needs careful handling. It is tempting to make it sound like a smoking gun, but the stronger argument is more sober. The modern data economy did not grow in a vacuum. It grew alongside state needs, military needs, intelligence needs, and corporate needs. The state wanted databases. The military wanted information systems. Intelligence agencies wanted tools that could organize, search, and interpret data. Private companies wanted profit. So the relationship between Silicon Valley and the national security state was never cleanly separate. That does not mean every entrepreneur is an intelligence asset. It means the architecture of the modern digital world has always had one foot in the marketplace and one foot in the security state. And once that architecture exists, it does what architecture does. It shapes behavior. A road tells you where to drive. A database tells institutions what they can know. AI tells them what they can predict. That is a major shift. Power used to ask, "What did you do?" Now it asks, "What are you likely to do?" That is the difference between surveillance and preemption. And once a state believes it can predict disorder, it will be tempted to stop it before it happens. Sometimes that may prevent real harm. Sometimes it will punish ghosts. This is the cleanest bridge between old secret societies and modern technology culture. Peter Thiel does not need to be a Freemason for the comparison to work. His language already has the structure of initiation. Find the secret. Tell only the chosen few. Build a small group of believers. Reject conventional opinion. Create a company that changes the world. Now, in Silicon Valley, this is usually treated as founder wisdom, and sometimes it works. Every serious company does need a strong internal belief. You cannot build something difficult if everyone in the room is waiting for permission from the average opinion. But there is a darker version. When a company begins to see itself as a world historical mission, normal limits start to look petty. Regulation becomes ignorance. Public concern becomes fear. Competition becomes weakness. Democracy becomes friction. And the founder stops sounding like a businessman and starts sounding like a prophet with a cap table. That is where Jiang's comparison becomes useful. The modern tech elite often does not want to sell products. It wants to redesign society. The language is cleaner than the old esoteric language, but the ambition is not smaller. It may be bigger. This is the point where the lecture becomes less about symbolism and more about machinery. Oracle stores and organizes data. Palantir analyzes data and helps institutions act on it. AI expands the scale, speed, and confidence of that process. That is the chain. Data becomes prediction. Prediction becomes policy. Policy becomes control. And the public usually sees only the final stage, when a decision appears on a screen, and nobody can quite explain who made it. A loan denied, a border flag raised, a police risk score generated, a feed quietly adjusted, a job application filtered, a protest mapped, a population modeled. The machine does not need to hate you. That is the polite horror of it. It only needs to classify you. The old empires used soldiers, priests, tax collectors, and informants. The new managerial empire uses dashboards, much tidier, less dramatic, more scalable, and that is exactly why it matters. This is the most dangerous idea in the whole lecture, not because of the word Antichrist. That word is theatrical enough to come with its own fog machine. The danger is the inversion. If technology equals progress, and progress equals salvation, then anyone who slows the technology becomes an enemy of salvation. That is how moral permission works. You do not say, "We want power." You say, "We want safety." You do not say, "We want surveillance." You say, "We want to prevent catastrophe." You do not say, "We want to override democratic resistance." You say, "The stakes are too high for delay." And sometimes the stakes really are high. AI does carry serious risks. States do face real threats. Criminal networks do use technology. Terrorists do adapt. Hostile powers do exploit open societies. The question is not whether risk exists. The question is, who gets to define it, who gets to manage it, and who gets watched forever in the name of solving it. That is where the public should pay attention. Because once opposition to a system is treated as evil rather than political disagreement, you are no longer debating policy. You are dealing with faith. And faith with a surveillance budget is not something to take lightly. My read on Jiang's lecture is this: the literal conspiracy story is the weakest part. The structural argument is the strongest. I do not think we need to believe in a single secret lineage running from the Knights Templar to Palantir to understand what is happening. That version is too neat. History is not that disciplined. People are vain. Institutions are messy. And half the time, the empire cannot find the correct PDF attachment. But the pattern Jiang describes is real. Across centuries, powerful people keep returning to the same dream. A world made orderly, predictable, rational, and controllable. In the religious age, they called it divine order. In the revolutionary age, they called it reason. In the bureaucratic age, they called it planning. In the digital age, they call it optimization. And now with AI, they may finally have a tool that makes the fantasy feel close enough to touch. That does not mean the machine will work. Actually, that may be the problem. It may work just enough to be dangerous and fail just enough to be denied. The central issue is not whether AI becomes conscious. The issue is whether power becomes automated. Because once power is hidden inside systems, models, databases, and risk scores, nobody has to take responsibility. The machine decided, the model flagged it, the system recommended it. Very clean, very modern, and very convenient for everyone who wanted control without fingerprints. So when Professor Jiang talks about the holy empire of reason, I do not hear a medieval secret society whispering across history. I hear something more familiar, I hear the old dream of perfect order dressed in new technical language, and I think we should take that seriously, not hysterically. Seriously, because the future rarely arrives wearing horns. Sometimes it arrives as a dashboard. If you found this useful, like and subscribe. There's more to come on this. Stay sharp.